welcome to Rough Cut Film Review. This is a review of Kick-Ass 2. So, I quite like the first Kick-Ass. It managed to take a slightly ironic take on teenage angst and used very nerdy devices to make it rather fun. There was darker stuff in there with Nicolas Cage's character, etc, etc, but it did a pretty good job of balancing the sweet and the darker stuff in there as well. Ultimately, it was sort of a postmodern Spider-Man. Kick-Ass 2 largely picks up where the first one left off, but very quickly it gets lost in the weeds and forgets what it's trying to achieve. One of the things done well in Kick-Ass, the first one, was balancing the fantasy stuff with some sense of grounding the high school stuff, being a nerd and so forth. Here that goes missing as it just gets sillier and sillier, but silly does not always equate to fun. They never get the balance right in this film. They're trying to mix up silly comedy with the baddie in his ridiculous costumes, with moments of extreme violence, scenes of torture, and the end result is actually rather depressing. There are rather hateful and nasty scenes here in this film, and that leads me to believe that the sweet sentiment of the first film has been forgotten about in the rush to turn everything up to 11 and get a sequel out there. There is what could have been a rather poignant subplot involving Hit Girl and her growing up and her having a childhood and all that stuff, but it's completely mishandled by the director. There's Kick-Ass's relationship with his dad, that's completely mishandled. There's the relationship between Kick-Ass and the bad guy, which is a mess and it's very confused, and every now and again they relate back to what is supposed to be the heart of the film, but the script and the tone of the film, i.e. what's happening in the film, are completely off the message. I get the impression that the film is supposed to be about acceptance and it misses it by a country mile. Overall, the film feels rather like a remake of the first film, but rather less interesting. The film's got a similar sort of art. Overall, the film feels very much like a less interesting remake of the first film. They even introduce a vigilante type character to replace Nicolas Cage's. This time he's played by Jim Carrey, who doesn't do anything interesting. They just introduce him to answer the question, how did these dorky teens get all this stuff? No one cares. That's not why people watch this film. They didn't need that particular plot hole filled because there are loads of other plot holes here which they don't bother with, so they could have just ignored that. The message of the film, which should be uplifting and empowering for nerds, gets garbled and confused. Either this is a sweet of relatively little threat, or it's a very violent film but much darker in tone, but it can't be both. And actually the first one did a really good job of balancing those things and it did pretty much work. This doesn't at all. An example of this is in the second one. One of the baddies is a giant Russian woman. She's extremely big, she's extremely muscular and looks deliberately ridiculous in her costume. It's a gag, and yet the first thing we see of her pretty much is murdering an endless stream of policemen who turn up in their patrol cars. She kills some with a lawnmower, some in other ways, and you just think, well, hang on a second, this is pretty nasty. These poor policemen, what did they do to deserve that? I thought we were making a joke. Not sure. The film seems to be of the opinion that if a character isn't a teen or in a costume or both, then the audience won't mind if they get casually murdered. There's one particular scene at a graveyard that was just remarkably bad taste, but only stupid people are going to like this film because it's such a mess. It's horrible. The sentiment behind it is totally off. The natural market for this film is going to be bright, disenfranchised teens who like Spider-Man and feel like an outsider. I don't think they're going to like this. The final climactic scene is very much a low-budget version of The Dark Knight Rises, with the good guys having a big punch-up with the bad guys. Ultimately, this film is a failure, and I'm really surprised how big a failure it is. It's not a noble failure, it's a nasty failure. And I'm really surprised by that because I like the comic book. I like the first film with reservations, and I thought they were just going to do more of the same. They sort of have, but by turning everything up to 11, it's actually become quite pernicious. And I really didn't like this, and I felt uncomfortable sitting there watching this, thinking, this isn't nice. Kind regards, Christopher Thomas.